Hello and welcome to the Recursion Cafe, where we play games from the discard pile. In today's video, we have not one, but two matches for you, so stay tuned. On the left, we have George piloting Moon Knight. It is a solo 3-move, 16 health character with 3 different identities. He starts as Moon Knight with the ability to move 2 spaces at the start of his turn, becomes Khonshu, who is a god, who is an absolute beast, hits with +2 value and does not take any effect damage, and then turns into Mr. Knight, who adds +1 to all his defense values. It's a really dynamic character, a little bit unpredictable at times, and you really have to just play around his identities. On the right, we have Mina playing Cloak and Dagger. Dual heroes with 2 move and 8 health each. They aim to do at least 2 combat damage over their opponent's defense in order to trigger their abilities, which is a chosen discard or an additional action. To kick things off, Moon Knight moves into the center of the map and takes up position right next to the folding chair and becomes Khonshu. Cloak and Dagger have to be really careful because even though Moon Knight is at 7 cards, he is Khonshu, and Khonshu hits really hard. And both Cloak and Dagger are pretty fragile, so they take up flanking positions on either side. Moon Knight plays Travelers of the Night and moves himself up to 4 spaces to teleport next to Dagger to gain an action and decides to swing in. And here we have a good enough for us into a Living Shadow. It's a really good offense into a really good defense. It is a 6 on attack, and Living Shadow becomes a 4 when Dagger swaps places with Cloak. However, that is 2 damage through, and Moon Knight, well, Khonshu technically, is able to draw 2 cards at no cost. He still has 1 additional action, and he'll swing it again, of course, making the most of his time as Khonshu. It is a 5 value, that's the part I like, into a Fate. So the effect won't trigger, but that is still 3 damage through to Cloak, who's already down to 3 health, I believe. It seems like a good start for the Moon Knight player. He then becomes Mr. Knight. Cloak is right next to him, so he's just going to attack in. It is a Channel of Dark into an we're all in this together, so Moon Knight will get to draw a card, but Cloak and Dagger will get to teleport Moon Knight next to Dagger and gain an action. So we're still on 2 actions for Cloak and Dagger. No damage through yet, but big combo potential right here. So Dagger's going to swing in, and it is a Commanding Impact into a Fist of Khonshu. Crucially, as a 4 value Fist of Khonshu. So Commanding Impact does 1 damage through, but the Dagger ability will not trigger, and neither will Fist of Khonshu. Commanding Impact draws a card. And will Cloak and Dagger continue the offense, or will they step away? Card count seems reasonable for both sides right now, but Cloak and Dagger is attacking into Mr. Knight, who gives the defensive bonus, so it's pretty tough. And here's a Light Force Barrage that's undefended. It's a good call from George. So both Moon Knight and Dagger take 7 damage. That is a full 14 damage dealt with 1 card. Neither Cloak or Dagger are looking particularly healthy right now. Moon Knight also on 8, but that's only halfway, whereas Moon Knight looks like he can just take out the hero right now. Dagger got the action gain and is able to swing in again with a Commanding Impact, but Mr. Knight defends with a good enough for us and opts to take the 2 damage for the 2 card draw, which is pretty reasonable right now because Cloak and Dagger are so low on health that even a little bit of damage over their defense will take 1 out. I'm not real into a Living Light. Unfortunately, that does take down Dagger, but and I think Mina played this with the understanding that Cloak would heal, and as demonstrated there, but she misread the card, and that's not quite what happened, unfortunately. So we have a 6 health Moon Knight into a 3 health Cloak left, who is now fighting against an Egyptian god who swings in really hard. So I'm not sure Cloak can do much about that. He will just maneuver away and try to fend them off with a Electro Stick. Khonshu moves in, recovers 2 health, gains an action. This looks like a setup for past and present intermingle, and lo and behold, there it is. It is a 7 value into a 2, and I think that might be game. So that was pretty quick. There we are. So Moon Knight takes round 1. Just swinging in so hard as Khonshu is difficult for Cloak and Dagger to fend that off. But we'll see how they do in round 2. This time the players have swapped characters. Mina opts to take second position as Moon Knight, so we'll get to see a different orientation as well as different playstyles as the characters have been swapped. So Cloak and Dagger takes the initial double maneuver and steps to the middle of the board, which is pretty reasonable. Moon Knight moves in, can't quite reach the token there, can't quite reach Cloak either with the free move. He will maneuver and then he will use the secret camera and gets to look at Cloak and Dagger's hand. It's a full 7 cards, so it's a lot of valuable information, and also draw a card, so he will also be at 7 cards. So we have a good smattering of offense and defense there. It's a pretty decent hand. Crucially, there's a living shadow and 2 Dark Force dimensions in there. They're pretty important, and a perfect balance. So Moon Knight wants to avoid getting caught between Cloak and Dagger at the same time. But it's pretty valuable intel to know ahead of time, anyhow. So then Moon Knight becomes Khonshu, and it's Cloak and Dagger's time to step in. There we are. There's the aforementioned pin. Let's see if it's the perfect balance. So it's Cloak, I believe, doing the attack, and it is a Traverse the Dark Force into a Fist of Khonshu, 2 movement-based effects. So that was a good bluff. It wasn't the perfect balance. It is a 2 into a 3, no damage done. The Fist of Khonshu gets to move the opposing fighter 4 spaces, and then Traverse the Dark Force allows both fighters to dance around a little bit, I think up to 2 spaces. I think George was looking to take a bigger defense out of Mina's hand with that bluff. So, over to Khonshu, Travels of the Night. It's a great card, especially when you're hitting for +2. Moves Khonshu up to Dagger, who does have access to an Electro Staff for +2 value. Here we are. It is a feint into a living shadow. An offensive feint which actually nullifies a 6 defense, and it becomes a 4 value feint into a 2 value blank card. So a really good call there from Mina, dealing 2 damage through the Dagger right in there. I mean, knowing your opponent's hand helps, but that's still a pretty strong call, to be honest. I think it helped that Khonshu had a 3 boost value at the top of the discard pile, so it was a good bluff that it could have been a past and present intermingle for a 7 value attack, hence the really strong defense on Cloak and Dagger's side. A really good play. So it looks like Cloak and Dagger maneuver. Are they going to try and continue offense? Moon Knight is 3 spaces away, unfortunately, so a boost is required if that's going to happen. But it looks like just a double maneuver, or no, a single maneuver and a chosen fate to spread out the damage a little bit and draw 2 cards. It makes sense trying to defend Dagger, as she is your main damage dealer and has the biggest hits. Should be able to get through Mr. Knight's defenses. And back we go to Mr. Knight. Always a little bit of an awkward time as Mr. Knight because your ability doesn't actually give you anything. But there's a double maneuver and using the food tray as cover, and again the ball is back in the court of Cloak and Dagger to try to get in there. There is the boost, and Dagger's time to step up. Is Moon Knight going to use that food tray? Given that Cloak and Dagger have movement effects, it seems prudent. There's the food tray, and it is a Light Force Barrage into a That's the Part I Like for 4 value. So 3 damage goes through, which means Dagger's ability does trigger. However, both fighters take that damage. There's always such a risk to using that card, especially when your opponent is on high health and card count, because you can't combo in and close out the game, or at least it's more difficult to. It is a Commanding Impact into a past and present intermingle, so that is a 4 value, so only 1 damage goes through. Commanding Impact draws a card, but the ability does not trigger, and Cloak and Dagger is forced to pass the turn. So now we have Moon Knight, right next to Dagger. Cloak is looking like he might come into pincer, and Moon Knight only has so many movement effects, so that might be a bad place to be. So Moon Knight is going to use the ability to take 2 steps out. Mina maneuvers and is trying to decide for a target, it looks like. Going for Dagger, which yeah, is pretty reasonable. So it just dances around the whole place and attacks from a different direction. It is another offensive fate into a shadow. No damage done this time, but again the swap just didn't happen, and Cloak and Dagger aren't very mobile, so that was a really nicely called offensive feint there. So Dagger swings back into Moon Knight, looking for that potential action gain, perhaps. Is there going to be defense? There will be. So it is a into darkness into a totally sane thing to do. So there's a 3 into a 2, no action gain, 1 damage through, but then of course Mina will trigger the ability to deal 2 damage to both. Unfortunately for Cloak and Dagger, Khonshu doesn't take any effect damage, so it'll just be Dagger taking none. So Cloak and Dagger down to 6 and 3, Moon Knight still looking reasonably healthy at 12. So far in both games, it looks like Cloak and Dagger are just having a hard time dealing with the amount of value that Moon Knight's cards can put out. It's always a bit nerve-wracking when your fighters get down to 3 health against Khonshu, because the values can really stack in Moon Knight's favour. So there's a boost in from Khonshu, standing right next to Dagger. It's clear that she's the obvious target because she only has 3 health left. Can he swing hard enough to defeat her? There's a 5 into a 4, so Mina needs to boost with a 2 value attack, 2 value card. Unfortunately, Perfect Balance didn't quite get the full value there, but that's how it is sometimes. There's good maneuvering and positioning by Moon Knight. So there is a 3 boost, losing a healing card, which is a big deal, but that does take down Dagger, which makes the matchup, I think, a fair bit easier. So Cloak attacks with a Dark Force Dimension, and Mina defends with a 3 value, totally same thing to do. So it's 1 damage through. The ability of Cloak and Dagger doesn't trigger, but Cloak gets to put Moon Knight anywhere and must discard it, forces them to discard a card, which is the past and present intermingle. So Moon Knight dances away, sorry, Mr. Knight I suppose, dances away back into the middle of the map, back to the folding chair in the middle. Cloak boosts in and attacks again. What's it going to be? It will be a Dark Force Dimension, another one, into the Fist of Khonshu. That's again 1 damage, only 1 damage through, so no Cloak trigger, but another Force discard, which is going to be I'm Not Real, which I believe might have been the last card in Mina's hand. So Cloak really putting the pressure on, threatening either with his ability or his card ability. However, Moon Knight gets a free move at the start of his turn for 2 spaces, and there's the secret documents are on the map, which are conveniently within range, which says discard your hand and draw 3 cards. So that's just a free draw 3 cards right there. Pretty good value, I must say. So there's a maneuver afterwards, and yeah, Moon Knight just takes a step away, forces Cloak to engage. Cloak attacks. It is just a 2 into a 3. Moon Knight gets to draw a card, or Khonshu gets to draw a card, and Cloak dances away. Unfortunately, it only moves 2 spaces, so it was really not quite far enough. He takes up a tactical position by the folding chair, as you would, and Khonshu comes in and will swing heavy. So it is a defensive feint at 3 value against a 3, which is buffed to a 5. So 2 damage goes through, but fortunately Khonshu is not able to boost that attack, because I think that might have been game at that point. Cloak is down to 2 health, so things are looking pretty cagey. Here's an attack by Cloak. It's Commanding Impact into a 4 value. We're on this together, unfortunately. So it's still only 1 damage through. Both players, well, sorry, Cloak and Dagger gets to draw a card, but Mr. Knight does not. And yeah, it's not looking great for Cloak and Dagger at the moment. There's not many options that Cloak has to hit very hard. It's a Let Insanity guide you into a Living Shadow. Mina mills a 3 boost value card, so gets to draw 3 cards. No damage is done, but having 3 cards, being 3 cards up is just a good trade. And at that point, I think George concedes. There's not really much Cloak can do to punch through Moon Knight's defenses, and Khonshu is able to hit so hard that the game wouldn't have lasted much longer. So there we have it. That matchup from both sides, piloted by different players, and it looks like Moon Knight has the edge. I think the matchup is winnable as Cloak and Dagger, but it takes a lot of work and a lot of knowledge on both sides. Thanks for watching, everyone. See you next time.